You know, every great story, really, starts with a simple, powerful truth. And for Charles Dickens, the man who basically invented Christmas as we know it, that truth was all about loss. This is the story of how that feeling, that one single loss, would come to define not just his most famous book, but the man himself.
See, this isn't just a simple explainer on how A Christmas Carol got written, oh no. It's the story of how that little book became a kind of mirror, showing him a past he had spent his entire life trying to outrun. And in the end, it's about how that past finally found him.
So, let's set the scene. It's a cold December evening in London, 1843. Charles Dickens is 31. He's a literary superstar walking through these gaslit streets he knows like the back of his hand. But for him, the holidays always bring this chill that has absolutely nothing to do with the weather.
He walks fast. He passes all these windows full of warmth and light and families, but he doesn't stop. Why? Because stopping means thinking. Stopping means remembering. And Christmas carries these memories he's just never been able to shake. It was the season he'd learned to survive, not to enjoy.
The memory that haunted him was so specific, it was like it was frozen in time. You see, after his father was thrown in prison for debt, 12-year-old Charles was forced to go work in a boot blacking factory, and it was this awful place where little boy learned how to become invisible.
The lessons he learned in that factory were just brutal. Survival meant you had to be fast, you had to be invisible, and you had to be useful. But the deepest cut of all came when his own mother suggested he stay at the factory even after the family's money problems got better. In that single moment, he stopped believing love could save him. He decided his only real value was in how useful he could be.
And this brings us to the core problem of his adult life. Yeah, he had achieved this incredible success, fame beyond his wildest dreams. But it gave him no shelter. None. The cold was still inside him.
I mean, his life was just this huge contradiction. On one hand, he's a household name, right? Got a family, sold out readings, the whole shebang. But on the other side, he was just relentlessly haunted, always worried about money, and he saw his own miserable childhood reflected in the eyes of every poor kid on the street.
He tried to pour all this pain into social advocacy. He gave these incredibly powerful speeches that moved his audiences to tears. But then everyone just went home. Nothing actually changed. And this growing frustration, this feeling of helplessness, was setting the stage for a major personal crisis. That crisis came to a head one night in December. He was walking home from another charity meeting that went nowhere. And walking through that cold, he felt the Christmas season coming not as a celebration, but as a deadline. A deadline to answer a question that had been eating him alive.
This was the first piece of it. After seeing so much indifference, he had to ask himself, can people actually, truly change for the better? Or is it all just an act?
And, that question led to an even darker one. Are human beings even worth the effort? Is there something fundamentally good in us that's worth saving?
And finally, maybe the most important question of all, is kindness just a nice little luxury for people who are comfortable, or is it an absolute necessity for our survival, as essential as the air we breathe?
He didn't have the answers. So, standing there in his dark study that night, an idea sparked. But it wasn't just a story. No, it was a confrontation. He was going to write his way to an answer. You have to realize, Scrooge wasn't some cartoon villain he just made up. Scrooge was a reflection. Dickens knew that Scrooge wasn't born cruel. He was a survivor who had built massive walls around himself to keep from getting hurt again. In Scrooge, Dickens saw a dark version of the man he was terrified he could become.
The writing process was just an absolute fever dream. He cranked out the entire book in only 6 weeks. He'd walk the streets of London at all hours, acting out the dialogue, laughing and crying so intensely that his friends genuinely thought he was going mad. This story had to be born.
And this, right here, is the big psychological breakthrough. In writing Scrooge's journey from darkness to light, Dickens was finally turning around to face his own ghost. He was confronting that 12-year-old boy he'd locked away for so long, the one who learned that being useful was more important than being loved.
When A Christmas Carol was finally published, it had this massive effect on the public, but its most important reader, by far, was its own author. The story he wrote to save everyone else ended up saving him.
Walking the streets that Christmas, seeing his little book in the hands of total strangers, he finally understood. He finally knew what he had really lost all those years ago in that horrible factory.
And it wasn't the obvious stuff. It wasn't just his innocence or his feeling of safety.
It was something way deeper, something more fundamental to who we are.
The thing he had lost was permission. Permission to feel joy just for the sake of it, without having to earn it. Permission to belong, without first having to prove his worth. You see, he had replaced the whole idea of unconditional warmth with this relentless need to be useful. Kindness had become a chore, not a joy.
And that's the beautiful, full-circle conclusion to all of this. In telling a story about a man who learns to open up his heart, Charles Dickens finally gave himself permission to do the exact same thing. The story had found its way home.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? That maybe every Christmas story is really about finding something that we've lost. And it leaves us with one last big question to think about for ourselves. What ghost from our own past is just waiting, not to be chased away, but to be welcomed home?